with a 64 present. A Playguide and video review. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi there, welcome to another Lemon 64 play guide and review. This week we'll be taking a look at the Great American Cross-Country Road Race, developed and published by Activision in 1985. This game was coded and all the graphics were made by Kevin Calcutt and Alex DeMille. In this game we have to travel from a start city somewhere in America to a destination, taking the shortest route and using the fastest time possible. So you can see a demonstration of the game running through the instruction sequence, and you can see some of the pitfalls on offer. By pressing F3 when the game loads, we can choose to load the opponent's scores from the disc, and this is the disc load version I'm actually using at the moment. And then by answering yes or no, we can choose our route. There are 4 routes available, and one of those is the Great American Tour, which will take quite some time indeed. But for this one, we're just going to use Seattle to Miami, and we can take any route you can see to Miami, and we'll choose Salt Lake in this instance, but we can also choose Billings or San Francisco as our first destination. By holding down the fire button, we can press the pedal down to the metal, and that will give us extra revs. In order to change up, we'll have to release that fire button to simulate pressing the clutch pedal or pulling the clutch gear, and then pushing forward will up a gear and pulling back will down a gear, and then it's quickly back on the fire button until you see the rev counter maxing out, and then it's time to up or down a gear. And it's possible to blow the engine in this game if you max out that engine rev too long, too high, and it's also possible to skid off the track and collide with all this traffic. When we collide with any other vehicle, that will take us straight over to the side of the road, and if we aren't aware of that, then we'll end up in the ditch. So we'll have to manually wrestle that car back onto the tarmac, get the engine running and try all over again. And it can be sometimes frustrating crashing out incessantly on these busy roads, and these are certainly busier than Night Racer that we reviewed all that time ago, and this is on par with Supercycle that we reviewed a few weeks ago, because it's very smooth and the graphics are very fresh looking and colourful. We have mountains in the background and clouds in the sky and things on the side of the track as well. There are 25 destinations in this game, so there are 25 races or stages that we can career along, and you can see the miles at the bottom will tick down. Each stage is a number of miles long, so when that hits 0, then we know that we're at the end of that track. By far the best tactic is to rise to an appropriate speed, hold it there and simply glide left and right and try to avoid as much of that traffic as possible. But things are complicated because we have fuel in this game. You can see in the bottom left corner the fuel indicator is flashing away and low fuel is flashing away on our screen. And all we can do at this stage is to look out on the horizon, because the game will tell us when a gas station is approaching. So at intervals during each of these stages you can see gas on the right, and what we have to do is slow right down to perhaps 40 miles per hour, and then when we see that on the horizon, pull in, press that fire button, and when we are adjacent to that thing you can see the fuel is rising, and then when it's at the top we'll get a push start. All we have to do is to hold down that fire button, jam that thing into second gear as quickly as possible, and then we are on our way again. There isn't a readout of the current gear, but everything else is on the dashboard, including the revs per minute, the speed, And the ET you can see is actually our total time that we've used so far on our race from Seattle all the way up there in Oregon State all the way down to Miami. We can also see a timer listed on our dashboard, and that means that we only have a certain time limit to get to that line. But having made it in time, it's time to choose our next destination, and we can even return and loop around incessantly if we want to do that. But let's continue on the diagonal towards Miami. Heading towards Denver, we find snow-covered landscapes, and we also find patches of snow on the road as well, and they will not only slow the car down, but they will make us spin off into the side, and so we'll career off wildly if we touch those things, and so we have to maintain speed, and yet we have to be careful at the same time. We can more or less ignore those gas signs unless we are out of gas and we have half a tank. And sometimes these things are quite short, so we don't really have to worry about that. But there's 4,000 miles to go, and I reckon that's a full tank on itself. So let's refuel anyway, and then we don't have to think about that until the end of this level. According to the Wikipedia article, this game was directly inspired by the 1976 movie The Gumball Rally, which was itself inspired by the Gumball Baker Sea to Shining Sea Memorial Trophy Dash, which ran in America from 1971 to 1979. The Cannonball Sea to Sea Shining Sea Dash, well, that inspired David Carradine's Cannonball movie, and also you'll probably remember the Burt Reynolds Cannonball Run films, and that also inspired the actual Gumball 3000 race, which, well, that started in 2006 and is still running to this day. The Great American Cross Country Road Race is actually an updated version of Activision's Enduro, which was released on the Atari 2600 machine in 1983. So you may notice a few similarities there between those games. And this game was originally released on the Atari 800 machine, and I originally saw this on the Atari 800 XL computer, and it was also ported to the Apple II machine as well. And so, as well as the Commodore 64, just 3 conversions out there, and I'd probably say the 64 is the best, although I am biased, so I probably would say that, although the Apple II conversion was a really nice effort. So continuing on again, you might find I wander off the side of the road to try and avoid that traffic, and it's certainly better to do that than to ram someone and have to build speed back up all over again. The only music in this entire game perhaps is the jingle that you hear when you complete each of the stages, and it's a shame that this game doesn't have music. But on the graphics front, you can see different landscapes, and the background graphics do change from stage to stage, and even though the side markings there are pretty bland with whatever they seem to be, signposts or mailboxes perhaps, well, those are pretty repetitive, but that certainly does not hamper the speed. It's important to keep an eye on our fuel and not to miss those gas stations. If we are travelling too fast, it is very easy to overshoot those gas stations, and that makes progress even more difficult. Yes, we can still survive if that happens, even if we run out of gas. We can press the fire button rapidly and virtually push that thing over the line and push that thing back to a gas station. In fact, if we blow our engine, we can still hold down that fire button and press that thing rapidly and push that to the nearest station and get that thing repaired. So there really is no defeats in this game. Even if we crash out, we'll reach a gas station, or even if we blow up, we'll eventually reach a gas station and repair ourselves. You may notice the sound effects on offer are only just barely enough to make this game playable, and they do change when we enter the garage and when we start a new level. Sometimes those engines rev very highly and sometimes those things rev very low, and the low engine sound in this game is very loud as well, and that may even put off the player because that isn't a very nice sound effect at all. But at least it does have sound effects, and without that this game would be very bland indeed. As I say, it doesn't have any music in the game, so sound effects in any quantity is still better than nothing. The controls are sensitive, but they aren't oversensitive, which is great. It means we can try for these great maneuvers along this very twisty road, and yes, we can even try to overtake on the grass. But the controls aren't too sensitive and they aren't very sticky either, so we won't have any problems driving around the corners, not like Pit Stop 2, which really did have weird controls which did make use of cornering speeds and things like that. In this game it's very much an arcade racer, so you won't find any tyres degrading or anything like that, although as I say we can blow our engine. But one of the great things about this game is will actually depend on the time as to the graphics that we get in the game. If we are travelling overnight, then the colours will dim and we'll eventually enter a night race, and in the night race sometimes we can get a tremendous speed going because don't forget at night there shouldn't be as much traffic on the road, and sometimes these levels are fairly straight as well. So ordinarily if we travel through the desert in the daytime we can really put our foot down, but at night as well you may notice that we have to travel over 160 miles per hour before we even catch any of those guys up. So how fast were those guys travelling? I think it's great that it provides an interactive map where we can choose our route and even double back on ourselves, and in this case it's giving us a chance to go to Cincinnati or Dallas, but what I'm actually going to do is to go to Nashville, continue on that diagonal, and sometimes it auto censors on the map, so you have to hold in the diagonal if you want to choose the diagonal, otherwise it won't. You may notice that we chose to end the previous race on petrol fumes, so let's take this opportunity to gas up, fill her up all the way up, and then we don't have that problem again. And sometimes, yes, you can just get over the line in time in this game, and it usually gives us a gas station somewhere near the beginning of the level. Look at that radar warning. At certain checkpoints the police will try to stop us, and if we don't stop then we'll get a ticket. We can't always avoid those police checkpoints, even if we drive very slowly indeed, and sometimes it's possible to nip into a gas station and that will cancel the police radar and we can simply cruise on ahead. So sometimes if you notice a gas station roundabout, then it's sometimes best to pull in. But in general, the best advice if you find a police checkpoint is to simply put your foot down to the floor and apparently drive in the middle of the road, and that will get rid of most police checkpoints most of the time. We'll see if we can get that to work a little later, and certainly high speed counts for a lot in this game. So you can see we are travelling at night, and it's a bit like Night Racer, and this time there is no jagged edges of a forest. No, this time we are racing towards an actual city which will appear on the horizon, and that gives us a great indication of where we are on the level. Let's choose another destination from the map, and you may notice that the miles counter at the bottom of the map does change according to the length of the stage, and so this stage to Atlantis seems to be fairly short. With only 2,000 miles to go, we may just make it on one tank, and the fuel gauge seems to be affected by the distance we have travelled rather than the speed we are going. But look at that radar warning. If we pull into the gas on the right, give ourselves full fuel. Will that get rid of the police? Well, no it doesn't, because if we travel further down this road we will find the police rolling down this road, and when we find that police again we'll get yet another radar trap warning. So let's again move into the centre, floor it, and then when we're past that plod, let's slam on so that we don't collide into all this traffic. Sometimes you'll find PC dipple on a straight road, and so you can just floor it straight away, but sometimes you'll find those on curves, making the job slightly harder. I think it's great that we have multiple vehicles to overtake. We have standard cars, bikes and also lorries as well, reminding us of Outrun. And the only downside of this game is that when we crash, then we won't bump, we'll simply career to the side of the road and we'll have to gather ourselves back together and carry on. It would have been more helpful if we didn't crash out and we simply bounced around that track, and that would have meant the track is more fun. But what we do get is some fast-paced, high-action racing, and when we really do put our foot down, then this graphics engine really does shift. It's great that we also have fuel to think about, and the brakes in this game, well, they're not amazing, but they do work. But look at that, missing that fuel, well, just about making it there. It's so easy to miss that by a pixel, and dashing by fuel at high speed is another one of those things where the player really has to look out for, and if they don't get that perfect, then that's another frustration. In conclusion, I really appreciate the depth and the length of this game and all the features that they managed to cram into it. I appreciate the 25 destinations and a great tour of America. I also appreciate all these graphics details, and the colours of the backgrounds and everything else do change. So now that we're getting towards Miami, we can see hills in Florida, which is actually inappropriate for Florida given that is a very flat state, and it's so flat that they've got Everglades which stretch on forever. But apart from that, those little technical touches I appreciate, and I think this game still has great presence and atmosphere even despite the lack of music, and everything else shines quality, especially for a 1985 game. Remember, Pit Stop 2 was only released in 1984, and I think that this game is already head and shoulders above Pit Stop 2, and it wasn't really bettered until the likes of Supercycle appeared, but we still haven't seen all the features of this game yet, and we will move on to those after we've completed this current race. So you can see I have just enough gas to make it to the finish line, so there's no point pulling over for that. So all we can do is to put our foot down, and we will get credit for the time it's taken of the whole race. And you can see we have currently gone through 24 hours and 10 minutes in this game, and it really doesn't take 24 hours to drive from one side of America to the other. In fact, you probably spend 24 hours driving from one side of California to the other, but in this game time is squeezed down, and that's no bad thing. It means we can travel and get somewhere pretty quickly, and we don't have to spend hours playing this game. I'd say the Great American Cross Country Road Race has great character, and it's one of those games that I've only just been introduced to thanks to the Lemon 64 Games competition, and this was recorded during the Lemon 64 Games competition, which is still running, playing this game. Unfortunately I went in the wrong direction, and so the score does not count, but if you go the Billings way then the score will count, and when you get to enter your high score table entry, then you can take a screen grab of that, post that on Lemon 64 and put yourself in the competition. It even gives us an opportunity to put the date in, but we cannot backspace or delete, unfortunately, so I've put 1914 in instead of 2014, but anyway, 100 years out doesn't make much difference, and so that's my time, 25 minutes, and on these long races it will probably take 30 minutes to get there end to end, unless you really do hammer that foot down onto the floor, and this game reminds me of the movie Vanishing Point to some extent, and all those great road movies of the 1970s. Before we leave this game, let's just try it again and have another few minutes run at this, and then I can show you a few more details, because the time of day will not only change the graphics in this game, and we do find dawn as well usually if we enter a dawn period whilst we're still racing. Even though on the previous run you saw it jumps straight from night into day, we do get a good dawn effect and a good evening effect as well. But we'll also find different environmental landscapes. You've seen the grasslands already as we drive through the plains and the prairies, but the amount of traffic on the road will actually depend on the time of day, and in the morning you will find rush hour traffic, and in the evening and at night it will generally be free of traffic. And that's added to all these other hazards like snow and ice on these stretches. But to have the traffic dependent on the time of day I thought was a novel touch, and it means that we can't always avoid the traffic if we take a shortcut across America. And so you can see the ice and snow level, you can really get some speed through there. There's also storm levels where you can see water on the track. And forest levels there, you can see the side of the track is now a different colour green, and as well as the night stages of course, where again you can get some tremendous speed because there isn't much traffic late at night. Taking a look at the scores, Home Computing Weekly gave this game 40%, Your Commodore and CMVG gave this 70%, the current Lemon score is 78%, Commodore User gave it 80%, Your 64 gave it 80%, and Zap gave it 81% in November 1985, which gives this game an average rating of 7.5 out of 10. Thanks for joining us, and I hope to see you again pretty soon.